Chapter 5, Bix Weir, silver analyst and founder of Road to Ruta, which can be found at roadtoruta, roota.com and youtube.com/Road to Ruta. The next interview is with Bix Weir of Road to Ruta, who not only has great insight into the history of the silver market, but has also been one of the most vocal analysts to speak out about the manipulation that has been corrupting so many of today's financial markets. I started becoming more familiar with Bix and his videos on YouTube in 2017, as again I was looking for more information about the silver market, and Bix was one of the few people who was regularly talking about it and presenting a lot of information that nobody else seemed to be noticing. In addition to detailing some of the specifics of the silver saga and some of the key players involved, Bix also captures the degree of the manipulation in today's markets, which has become truly unbelievable, especially in recent years. And while I understand that there are some folks who simply don't like hearing about anything regarding manipulation, from my perspective, it's simply impossible to analyze the pricing of the precious metals, and silver in particular, without factoring it in. So I've had a great deal of respect for Bix for being willing to speak the truth, because while it has led him to be uninvited from certain conferences and organizations, as he mentions in his interview, his videos and insights have been instrumental in my education. And perhaps the definition of a true patriot is someone who speaks up when he sees something isn't right, even when it isn't always in his own personal best interest to do so. Lastly, like most of the experts interviewed in this book, Bix is just a genuinely good man, much as he appears in his videos. I had the pleasure of meeting him in person at the 2019 Anarchapulco conference in Mexico, where I found him to be really kind and encouraging, of course, in addition to having so many fascinating things to say. That's where we started getting to know each other, which eventually led to him agreeing to do an interview for the book. So I think you'll enjoy hearing what he shared during our conversation, as it was a fun discussion that added another great perspective to what the other guests have already shared. This interview was recorded on March 11, 2019, and the closing price of silver that day was $15.36. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and we are again talking silver, the fascinating things that are going on in the silver market. And in my research, I've always been looking for other people who are seeing the same thing, seeing what's actually going on out there, which is really how I came across Bix Weir of Road to Ruta a few years ago, who's become one of my favorites these days. Had the pleasure to catch up with Bix recently in Anarchapulco. And Bix, great to welcome you in, my friend. Looking forward to talking some silver today. How are you doing?
I'm good. The funny thing is, I love talking silver. I've been talking silver over 20 years now, and I think I figured out all I needed to know after the first 10 years, and then it was like regurgitating for a while. So I love to talk about the stuff, and let's see what I can remember today, right?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, because it's one of those things where once you get in, you're just keep seeing more and more evidence supporting the same thing, which few others are seeing. So, and like you said, it is incredibly beyond fascinating. So perhaps to get started, I'm curious how you got into this. When did you first start looking at silver, and what led you to see that maybe something wasn't as advertised?
That's a good way to put it. I think it was the late 90s that I first got a job with a company financing a lot of mining equipment. So, and I was in charge of like end-of-lease stuff for just the big, huge haul trucks and excavators and loaders and all that. And I loved it, but I didn't know that much about gold and silver and all commodities. So I started digging in about commodities, and I came to understand. I was like, wow, boy, these commodities should go crazy because they're printing money like it's going out of style. And that's the first thing they teach you in Economics 101. So I bought some, I think, Newmont mining stock back then. And after I bought it, it's like everything. After you buy it, the first week or two, it gets slammed down by like 30%. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Yeah. So that it kind of started my battle to understand what was going on. And it started with gold. And obviously, when you hit gold, you really run up against silver and say, oh my God, this has all the attributes of gold, but it's also an industrial commodity, which is huge in the high-tech world we're moving into. So, yeah, that's kind of how I started early 90s, and I got hooked up with Bill Murphy of GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, Worked with them for 7 or 8 years, just fighting, writing letters to all my congressmen and the CFTC and all that, and really studying and trying to figure out what was going on. And ultimately, we figured out, well, it's 100% rigged every day in every trade. Is there anything we could do? And after 10 years banging your head against the wall, saying, it's not that they can't figure out that it's rigged. It's that they need it to be rigged to continue on the fiat monetary system. And that's kind of when I said, okay, let's look at other things.
Yeah, and interesting you mentioned that, Bix, because as I've been doing this, one of the questions a lot of people have asked me is, because I present the information to people with a non-finance background and they get it and they wonder why are people so reluctant to talk about this? Why are the miners unwilling to talk about it? And it seems like there's a lot of people going out of their way to keep it somewhat secret.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, I had a big problem with the CEOs of all the silver mining companies. I'd go to the Silver Summit up in Spokane and speak every year. I said, well, here's the evidence, guys. This is your industry, and it's being destroyed by these big banks. What are you going to do about it? And every year they had no answer. And I was like, it partially had to do with they need the banks to get financing for, to build out their mines and things like that. But mostly it had to do with them just being not very bright, not really smart people. They went to college and they studied, the dollar should be going down because they're printing too much of it. It's that thing. And then they just stopped learning, and they get into this frame of mind where it's always, nobody else is saying manipulation. There are a couple CEOs saying manipulation now, but it's been manipulation for 20 years, probably since the 1850s, truthfully. But what do you do? What do you do if you're a CEO of a mining company? You're just happy you hit the peak of your industry, right? And you don't want to stir the pot too much. I ended up getting kicked out of this Silver Summit, and I said, "Well, we can't have you. You're too conspiracy oriented." I'm like, I use facts to show what was going on, and they're like, "Well, no, people don't want to hear that." I said, "Okay, whatever you want."
Yeah, I know Bill Murphy, who has also done an interview for the book, mentioned the same thing, and it's just, I can see both sides of it, where on one hand, I get the pressure that they're under. Certainly is why I'm a big fan of Keith Neumeyer and First Majestic Silver. Keith is also a part of this, where seeing what's happening, speaking up about it, because it's really hard to otherwise explain what happens in the price if you don't factor that in. So am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And the extent of the manipulation. I mean, you just look at the volumes of silver traded every year compared to the amount available, and it's really insane. I think it's 500 to 1 now. The last time I did the calculations a couple of years ago. So 500 derivatives get traded for every single ounce of silver pulled out of the ground, which is insane. I mean, why? And then, of course, we find out that JP Morgan's rigging the market, and they have a whistleblower and all that. And it's like, well, that's what we've been saying for 20 years. Ted Butler's been all over that, and proved it with the CFTC's own data, the CME's own data. I mean, what else do you need to know? And that's kind of where I got to about 4 or 5 years ago. And I was like, okay, there's nothing more to learn about silver once you understand that the manipulation is 100% full and condoned by the regulators and the U.S. government.
Right. And you've mentioned in a lot of your videos on your Road to Ruta channel how this has been going on for 150 years, which, again, it's one of those things where every time I think I have some grasp of what's going on, you just realize there's so much more fascinating history. So perhaps maybe as far back as you can go in any historical things, and then we'll catch up to what's going on today.
Sure. I mean, if you go back, back in the early 2000s, I was really studying, the history of silver, and the manipulation really started in the 1850s when they had the Opium Wars. Basically, what was going on is all the silver was leaving England because people wanted all the things they could get from the Orient. They wanted the silks and the teas and all that, and they were paying for it with silver. So all this silver was flowing out of England into China, and China was becoming very strong and wealthy. And then HSBC was set up. Hong Kong Shanghai Bank was set up in China, and they they got the public addicted to opium, and they forced them to pay with silver. So basically, it was churning the silver back and forth. And so the English could still get their teas and their silks and things like that. But the silver was coming back through the opium sales. And then you had the Opium War. So, I mean, the history of silver is just filled with all kinds of conspiracies and control. And because it was silver has been money longer than gold has been money. Right. Silver has always been the people's money because there was always more of it. But now there isn't, by the way. There's not more silver than there is gold, maybe underground, but not above ground, which is really interesting because they're both monetary metals. We can talk about that in a second. But if you go back in time, the banks always hated silver because they had all the gold. They were real good at hoarding gold. They weren't good at hoarding silver. There was so much of it around in the hands of the people, then they used it as money. So, but they understand more than most that silver has the power because of the scarcity factor. Now, these days, has the power to destroy the economic system. And I think right now it's been rigged for so long, and the price has been controlled for so long and the Hunt brothers understood this absolutely in the late 1980s, and that's why they had to take them out. That silver is the Achilles heel of the banks. Gold is not. Gold, they don't really care what the price is. They can have gold go through the roof because gold, other than a store of value in money, gold doesn't have much use. You look at jewelry. Silver, on the other hand, it's needed in everything modern, and it gets consumed in little tiny bits. So they understand that unless you control the price of silver, you can't control commodities, you can't control the monetary system. So it's important. It's important for our lifestyle. The rigging has gone through every commodity now, but silver's the number one because it's so scarce compared to what it used to be. It used to be, I think 60 billion ounces have been mined in that neighborhood on planet Earth since day one.
It's about one trading day on the COMEX.
Exactly. It is crazy. And the sad thing is that people are fine with these volumes going off the charts. And I was never fine with the volumes. I'm like, what is, I had an argument with Jeffrey Christian one year at the Silver Summit, and he was debating Bill Murphy. And Bill did all right.
Which was a great debate, by the way, and worth checking out for folks who are first hearing about this.
Yeah. It's still posted, I think. Mm-hmm. But the key, what Jeff Christian was saying, Bill was talking about this huge collapse in the price, and Jeffrey Christian said, no, it's just the derivatives rolling over for the next month and all that. And when he explained it that way, and you look at the volumes, that's completely illegal in commodity law. You can't have derivatives. You can't have futures and options setting the price of silver. And I'm jumping up and down and said, you won right there. You won the debate because he just admitted that the derivatives are setting the price of the commodities. But look at the regulators. They're just as dumb as, the CEOs of mining companies these days. It's either dumb or they're corrupt. And some of the CEOs of mining companies are absolutely corrupt. Some of the bigger mining companies that control a lot of the silver, and obviously Newmont was extremely corrupt with gold and huge silver hedges. So there's corruption or there's stupidity in the silver world, and most of it is stupidity or just not is a lack of ability to really analyze how these prices are set.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of what I saw during my time on Wall Street, where the stock market all over CNBC, but any of those smaller markets that people don't pay attention to. In fact, I was on Wall Street for 11 years. I still can't remember a single person who ever said anything about gold and silver except wanted me to stop talking about it.
That's it. They want you to stop talking about it, mainly because the smart people know why you need to stop talking about it. The dumb people will never, because their boss doesn't tell them about it, they don't think it's real.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And going back to what you just said a little bit earlier, where you mentioned you didn't think the gold price soaring would be a big of an event. I guess the feeling I've had was that part of why it seems on some level the government is at least looking the other way and allowing it. I mean, there's enough evidence and people have contacted them. My feeling had been that obviously if you have gold and silver prices soaring, traditionally that's been the sign that alerts people that something is going on. And especially now where you have a massive U.S. government that everything they do is funded with printed or borrowed money. So when it comes to silver, my guess is that if silver went to $50 or $100, probably most people wouldn't even notice. Yet if that happens, then you have attention on gold. Although it sounds like you're saying silver actually is still more of a critical issue in the two. And how would that play out?
Well, I think there's, I would say after studying both for so long, the big difference is the supply. We're lied to about gold supply. We're lied to about silver supply. All you got to do is read Gold Warriors by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave, and talks about 300,000 tons of gold coming out of Asia in the 1950s to set up all these dark funds, and the U.S. was in charge and things like that. They have massive amounts of documentation. They spent their whole life documenting that, and it is absolutely true. I've spent my life documenting a lot of gold. There was gold found in the Grand Canyon, billions and billions of ounces, on the front page of the New York Times. And then I went there and I saw where they were mining it. And you can't even walk around with a shovel in the Grand Canyon anymore. It's completely illegal to take a pebble out of there. So there's a place in California called Chocolate Mountain, which is a gunnery range. And they horizontally drilled into that deposit and found massive amounts of gold in there. And then the military came and shut it down. Dianne Feinstein flew out all these senators, and it's completely off limits. You look at California, massive gold mining areas. The federal government owns 41% of all of California now. They put it in desert wildlife preserves, and these are huge gold areas. And they're not trying to save, the desert toad or anything like that. They're trying to hide the gold until we need it. So when we talk about silver going up in price, it does affect everybody's daily life if it goes up high enough. Because it's used in such a small amount, you don't see it all that much. But if silver goes to $2,000-$3,000 an ounce, you're going to pay an extra $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for your large flat screen TV. So people will be affected by that. But as far as on the monetary side, I really don't think silver will ever become a monetary instrument again, because I think it's just too valuable to be used as money now. I think we need it in this high-tech future with solar panels, you name it. Silver's going into everything these days.
And I hear you guys out there in California beginning next year. Jeff Clark had a great silver presentation and mentioned that any new homes beginning January 1st of 2020 are requiring solar panels.
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of, the lefties out here have plans for everything, right? They got plans how to use your silver that they know better than you how that should be used. Yeah, we'll see how all that goes. California's broke, just like every other state. They have outstanding obligations that we can't pay, and as long as the money printing still goes on at the federal government level, and the federal government keeps pumping money into the states, states can get all excited about saving the world. Look what's happening to Illinois and Chicago, completely being destroyed. They're going to need that massive money printing, or they'll tax people to death, and the people will just move out of the state, which is just as bad. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think. Well, there's not enough silver to do what California wants to do, and the difference to me between gold and silver, I give gold the benefit of the doubt as far as, okay, even if 6 billion ounces supposedly on planet Earth that has been mined, even if that is true, there's only 6 billion ounces of silver that's been mined also. Well, no, there's been more, except it's all used up. It's gone. It's in landfills and flat screen TVs and things like that. Available silver, I think they're about even. Most analysts say there's about 6 billion of each that is recoverable silver, recoverable gold. And you look at the price, it's 82, 83 to 1, the gold silver ratio. That's insane. I mean, that that on the face of it should tell you there's massive, massive, massive price manipulation downward on silver. And I think there's manipulation of gold too. I think gold prices suppress as well. Yeah, it's obvious. We've proven that as well. But it's not as pressing as what's going on with silver. And silver's such a smaller market than gold. Theoretically, someone, a well-heeled crypto billionaire can walk in and take every last piece of silver available for sale and walk away. And you can do it at the same price because they rigged the price low. That's what JP Morgan's been doing, every month, pulling off millions of ounces of silver.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's always stood out to me. Again, the small size of the silver market, where I think I saw a chart where if you combine the value of the world's stock market, 76 trillion, and in terms of investment grade silver that's available, I hear is about 2 billion ounces. So at $15, talking about a very small market, relatively speaking. And you mentioned the gold to silver ratio, which I've done a couple of interviews about this year because obviously it's on the higher end. And some people talk about it reverting back down to 40 and how really over the last century, we haven't been close to the 12 or 15 to 1. Although it was interesting, I was reading a Peter Schiff report where he had a chart that, aside from the last 100 years, the ratio basically sat at 12 to 15 for 2,000 years prior to that, which I was almost stunned to see. Curious if you have any thoughts on why that has changed so much and, again, how you see it playing out going forward.
Well, I think it's really interesting because the 12 to 1, 15 to 1 ratio, that's the natural ratio coming out of the ground at that time. And most of silver back then, it was like gold. It was used as money, so it wasn't consumed. See, now it's much different. It should be the exact opposite because we are consuming silver through industrial applications. So you look at the last 2,000 years, yeah, you can say, yeah, it was priced appropriately because that's how they pulled it out of the ground. And all the silver and gold was used as money for the most part back then. Now it should have gone the exact opposite way. We should be at a 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 ratio now because we've been consuming all this silver in the industrial age. So, where the disconnect is just more and more obvious of the manipulation, price manipulation, because all we're talking about is price. Coming out of the ground, it's still, what is it, 800, 900 million ounces every year that comes out of the ground. And most of that's consumed not by investors. Most of that's consumed in industrial applications, solar panels. I don't know how much silverware they do. Silverware gets recycled, so it's kind of like the photography. I haven't analyzed the whole what goes where, and I don't even know if I believe any of it anymore because most of it comes from people like Jeffrey Christian at CME Group, complete liar, fraud. I mean, he's been proven to be the shill for the bankers for I can't tell you how long. He came out of Goldman Sachs, and it's interesting when it was Aon, I think he was involved with, and they said, okay, we're going to rig the silver price. This is in the 70s. We're going to rig the silver price, but we need a third party to say everything's fine. So, hey, Jeffrey Christian, why don't you set up your own company, CPM Group, and we'll fund you. You take care of all our derivative transactions, and then you be in charge of that third party. Yeah, the numbers are right. So I don't believe in any numbers anymore that gets put up by the Silver Institute or by CPM Group or by what was the other one? What's that? The Silver Users Association. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if there was like hey, I'm in the Gasoline Users Association. It's so obvious that they're rigging the price. And what do? Basically, the regulators turn a blind eye. So it's kind of, we try our best to stop the manipulation, but I don't think it'll stop until everything stops. But that might be coming with all the derivatives going crazy now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because once you really dig into it, you see how, well, we can look at the silver numbers that we get, but where do they come from and how accurate are they? How much silver is out there? As I'm sure you're aware, Dr. Mark Skidmore, PhD economist at Michigan State, actually heard that the government had lost staggering amounts of money and set out to disprove that. The guy sounds like He's been eating accounting for breakfast for 50 years. Very credible, in my opinion. Now went through the statements, found out there's $21 trillion of missing money. On top of it, he said, hey, your budget was $122 billion. Here's a $700 billion transfer. What's that about? Nobody knows. Nobody interested in investigating. So any thoughts on that, where, again, we really have no idea how much money is out there, and certainly I'm guessing, when the Fed puts out their numbers, you're not sitting there marking it down as gospel. So we don't really know, do we?
No, and that's money is confidence. Money's a confidence game. Skidmore's numbers came in at 21. Now they're doing more work, and they're up to 30 already. 30 trillion. Oh, yeah. What's another 9 trillion, right? But I think the interesting thing to look at, from my standpoint, on the road to Ruta, the documents out of the Fed said they were gonna print money to infinity. And I'm like, wow, that might take a long time. 30 trillion is like a big jump, but to infinity, really? And then I do more research. I'm like, wait a minute. Who's to say that any of these countries are reporting any numbers at all?
Right.
We glean the 30 trillion from the documentation within the government. What about printing money and not telling anybody about it? How much is done in that world, and which countries do it? I would expect all of them to do it.
Yeah.
And then the ones that get out of hand, the U.S., we bring in our military and take care of the situation. But it's definitely a confidence game, and the confidence starts breaking down, everything breaks down. So I do think it's limitless on the amount of money that has been made. And you look at like Trump arguing to get $5 billion for the wall. They sneeze $5 billion. And so you got to wonder what is real and what is, for the public to chew on for a while and keep paying their taxes. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I think we're getting close to a point where they're just, everything's so out of control that people are just going to throw their hands up and say, let's walk away.
I couldn't agree more. I guess the only thing I could say in another hand is that back when I left Wall Street in 2012, I was stunned it was still going on then, and all the folks I've had on here talking about it, I find uniformly are shocked that we're in 2019 now, still looking at $15.5 silver. But perhaps you could lay out for folks maybe how it got to this point. Again, we have the Hunt brothers, a situation that, as I've been researching it, not quite as often portrayed, where it was just a bunch of guys went out, cornered the market. In fact, I believe that even the amount of silver they had was still a relatively small percentage. But maybe you could start there, touch on Warren Buffett, and then we can get into Bear Stearns and J.P. Morgan.
Sure. The Hunt brothers, they were true Americans. They were looking to call the U.S. Treasury on how much money they wanted to print, and they went after. Their big problem was they got their hands on about 100 million ounces of physical silver, and then they got into the derivative market on the COMEX and got another 120 million, I think, in silver futures contracts, and they started taking delivery. See, that's when they started playing in the game that they could get destroyed. So the CFTC comes in there and basically shuts them down, and the DOJ comes in there and shuts them down and says, okay, no more buy orders, only sell orders, and boom, the price goes from $50 to $20 in a matter, I think it was 2 months, something insane like that. Destroys the Hunt brothers because they were playing with leverage too, and they should have known. They should have known that the government can come in. If they had just stuck with silver, they would have been fine, and they probably would have accomplished their goal of taking down the U.S. Treasury. But they didn't. So, and then those who say, like Paul Volcker wrote in his book that because he was the head of the Fed at the time.
And he even mentioned the gold suppression in there.
No, he mentioned gold. He said, I should have rigged the gold market. I should have controlled the gold price. He did. He just didn't tell anybody about it.
Right.
I don't think he mentioned silver at all.
You mentioned silver, but I remember I was shocked where he was talking about how the collapse of the London gold pool and how we had to suppress it. So again, like you found when you're with your time with GATA, I mean, the statements are out there.
Oh
They
yeah, it's
inadvertently
proven.
slip out from time to time.
It's a proven fact that, and in Volcker's book, he says he didn't control the gold price in 1980s. That's why he had to put the interest rate up to 20%. Of course he did. They controlled all commodities with the computers. He had the ability and he used it, just like Arthur Burns did before him. Arthur Burns was Alan Greenspan's mentor. Mm-hmm. And so Greenspan was a computer expert in the 1960s and brought computer trading to the world, literally. And that's kind of how computers, if you look at the price of gold and silver since we went off the gold standard in 71, it's almost straight up. But controlled. It's a controlled rise. And that was the only reason that was done. The ability to do that was the rigging of the markets with computers. Without computers, we couldn't have done this. We couldn't have had an unbacked fiat system for the last, 50 years now. Unheard of in monetary history. It's usually 7 or 8 years before the whole thing crashes. So it should have crashed in 81. And if you read the gold report, Reagan's gold commission report, it says, well, we're not gonna go back to a gold standard now, but unless we get the budgets under control, I think we'll have to. And look what happened to the budgets since 81. Reagan starts the Star Wars program where they're spending billions. Now we're spending trillions. Yep. And that's just what we tell the world about. So, yeah, the silver price suppression, they took the Hunt brothers out, and then they passed this. They call it, we call it the silver hot potato. The short position on the COMEX is where the prices are determined. That's the weird thing is there's only 2 exchanges on planet Earth for real silver. And that's the COMEX and the LBMA. The LBMA isn't even an exchange. Back then, it was just a couple of bankers saying, hey, Joe, what's the price? Hey, Freddie, the price is, $6. And
I loved how you pointed out that the LBMA, ironically, even has a magazine called The Alchemist, which...
oh, yeah. And I think the most interesting thing about that, because I've read almost all the Alchemist publications, and one of them, the largest J.P. Morgan trader, this is back a while ago, they were trying to justify their position, how many shorts they held. And he was saying, no, the LBMA, the volumes there are 3 times the volume that they announced because they announce net transfers on the LBMA, as if people are transferring 1 billion ounces here and 1 billion ounces there of silver. He goes, no, it's 3 times. So if you look at the volume, that's how I get the number 500 times. Is the LBMA says, I think it's 30 billion ounces a year they trade. It's actually 90 billion, or maybe it's 110. I think it was 110. But those are only 2 exchanges really, and then you have your silver derivatives. They're both derivative exchanges. Not much real silver passes hands. But then you have ETFs. That's just another silver derivative, and it's just so much fraud and ability to commit fraud, because on the exchanges too, where this stuff is traded, it's all phantom shares being traded back and forth. No contract settlements, no exchange of contracts, no exchange of ownership, no exchange of money even. It's just a big musical chairs game, and as long as that music's still playing, everybody gets to pretend they own silver in their 401k.
Yeah, and interestingly, after the Hunt brothers came along, I've read and heard a lot about how Warren Buffett got involved, and he actually did hold the physical. I'm wondering what you could comment on that situation.
Well, sure. So Buffett went in and started buying silver in the late 90s, and government went in and said, stop, or we're going to take you out like we did the Hunt brothers. He had about 120, they believe 120 or 130 million ounces. Then Mr. Buffett got himself in a little trouble with General Re, a reinsurance company that he bought. They were doing a whole bunch of fraud, and he was right in the middle of it. So the powers that be, the banksters and the criminals, go to Buffett and say, hey, we'll let you out of this General Re problem if you give us all that physical silver you have. And so that's how Buffett got out of General Re. they got that physical silver and they started the silver ETF, SLV, it's known as. And that's where they got their seed silver to create that. It's just another fraudulent type of vehicle for controlling the price of silver. It diverted so much money from like retirement accounts away from physical silver and into this fraudulent thing called SLV.
Right. And when Buffett was buying and holding his silver, did that short position exist back then? I guess as early as I've heard was Bear Stearns and then passed on to JP Morgan.
Yeah, it went back. It's gone back since the early 70s. Ted Butler does a good kind of a rewind on who it was. Like Drexel Burnham had it for a long time. AIG had it. Bear Stearns had it. Then JP Morgan had it. The question now is, where is it? A lot of people saying it's either a Citibank or Deutsche Bank. JP Morgan's pretty much out of their silver shorts, and they amass, well, it depends which day you ask them, because they'll trade 1 billion ounces at the drop of a hat, and all of a sudden their short position's back. It's like, what's going on?
We don't know what happened since we started this interview. It could be $10 or $100 higher or lower.
It's insane. But yeah, and JP Morgan's the only one who ended up doing the smart thing, which is get your hands on as much physical silver while the price is so low. So they obtain the silver very, I think, illegally by rigging the price lower so that they can get as much physical. But the question is now they're pretty much out of their silver short position. Well, not fully out. They were, but who's going to take it? And right now, I think it's in the hands of like hedge funds. A lot of this had to go dark because the banks are regulated. But the hedge funds like BlackRock is a huge player in the manipulation of commodities. And then you got big high-frequency trading companies like Virtu Financial, who I exposed back when they were called EWT LLC. I remember seeing their name as an authorized participant of SLV, and I'm like, who the hell is EWT LLC? Turns out it's Vincent Viola, who was the counterpart to Bernie Madoff back in the day in that criminal fraud. It just never ends, and it's so obvious. And the regulators and the DOJ, no one's going to do anything. Although this whole DOJ investigation, where they announced that they have a silver trader that says, yes, I've been rigging the market during the time that they were investigating silver, and my bosses told me to do it at JP Morgan. That's a big deal. So, and they can't walk away from it now. They've already got the goods on them.
I thought that last part you mentioned about how he wasn't just, we're not talking about the rogue trader, but I mean, it's amazing. Nothing has actually happened, and JP Morgan's still heavily involved.
Well, I don't know, because Blythe Masters mysteriously up and left her cushy little crypto job, and she was the boss back then of the silver traders at JP Morgan. So I think something's coming down in that front, which would be great. And it would be vindication for the GATA guys and the silver guys, and Ted Butler especially, who spent the last 50 years doing this.
So you do have some optimism about the DOJ?
Oh, yeah. I still hold my silver. I'm not selling my silver. I'm hanging on to it. I know that the price of silver is massively, massively manipulated. And until it gets to a proper ratio with gold, and gold's massively manipulated. So yeah, silver will absolutely, if it was freely traded, should be up over $1,000 right now. There's no doubt in my mind. And it would be trading probably 1-for-1 with gold, because there's about 6 billion ounces of each. But then you start thinking, well, nobody really needs gold other than a store of value, and everybody needs silver for the high-tech future. Silver should be worth more than gold.
Yeah. And speaking again of JP Morgan and going back a little bit, I'd love to get your take. I know you've made a lot of videos spoken about this, because by 2011 I was into silver. It's kind of funny when you mentioned about the Hunt brothers seeing what was going on with the money printing. I was sitting on the New York Stock Exchange. Remember our morning notes, there was, I think it was actually from Goldman Sachs, ironically enough, but saying, here comes QE2. You have Ben Bernanke launch that. And I actually bought a 1,000-ounce block of silver in response. So my feeling was that there was a legitimate reason why there was this demand growing for silver. and I'll let you take it from there as we saw prices go up to 49 and then get hammered after that.
Well, it was under control. It wasn't like, oh my God, it's getting away from us. And I even told all my Road to Ruta followers, I said, okay, we got a problem. This guy, Bill Daley, has gone to be Obama's chief of staff in 2011, January of 2011. Bill Daley was Jamie Dimon's, the head of his SWAT team. That's what it was like the cover of Money magazine. It said, Jamie Dimon's SWAT team, whenever there's a problem, they'll send Bill Daley over there. So it was J.P. Morgan had just inherited the Bear Stearns short position in silver. They had to control the silver market. The way to do that is to run it up and then crash it, just like they did with the cryptos recently. So they get Bill Daley as Obama's chief of staff. So he's sitting right next to the president, and they're saying they knew that they had to control the silver market if they were going to continue this con of rigging all the markets. So Bill Daley goes in January. They literally run the price up at a 45-degree angle from $20 to $50.
Mm-hmm.
And then May 1st, bang. It was a Sunday night. I remember that. It drops from like $50 or $49 down to 40 almost instantly.
It was the night they claimed Osama bin Laden was killed and thrown into the ocean. And I remember, I'm like, I wonder how this will impact things. And then a couple hours later, there goes the silver.
And then bang. And that was the beginning of the artificial bear market that we're in now with silver. Mm-hmm. But people you don't recognize that until you look back and say who was where and when and why did they do this? They did it because J.P. Morgan had this huge short position. And if you look at J.P. Morgan's position now, they've accumulated over 800 million ounces of physical silver. Remember, the Hunt brothers had 100 million ounces of physical and get busted for cornering the market. Yep. But Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan get 800 million ounces plus, probably over 1 billion ounces now, and nothing happens to them. Mm-hmm. Why is that? And they rigged the price. During that whole time, they were rigging the price. Remember, when they took over Bear Stearns, they got, I think, a $20 or $30 billion backstop from the U.S. government. That was all about the potential to lose money in silver. That's why they gave him that backstop. And then, so, yeah, Blythe Masters was real good at rigging markets with derivatives. She cut her teeth on the, credit default swaps. She was the queen of credit default swaps. That imploded in 2008. And then they put her in charge of all the commodities over at J.P. Morgan, silver and gold especially. And we called her the Wicked Witch of the West because she was wicked, and she still is wicked. And there's so many lies that come out of her mouth. So I do hope she gets busted for what she did to the silver people back then. We're in an artificial bear market. Silver's in an artificial bear market that was started by Bill Daley and Jamie Dimon when Bill Daley was Obama's chief of staff. I've proven it 100 times, and I showed everybody the data. And even as it was going, after I figured out what they were doing, I was like, look, I'll tell you the exact point where they're going to slam it. And then Bill Daley left office in January of the next year. Where was the price of silver? At $20. It was like $20 to $20. He drove it up. He crushed everybody's hopes and dreams. And then that's where we are today.
And Bix, you mentioned Bear Stearns again there. I think it may have been Ted Butler, or maybe I've heard this elsewhere. I think it was Ted, though, had suggested that Bear Stearns' failure was actually due more to their silver short position than their mortgages. Any thoughts on that?
It could have been anything. I mean, Bear had, I think it was $13 trillion in derivatives. So anything could have gone sideways at Bear.
Which is stunning because I'm remembering Bear from my Wall Street days, one of the smaller ones. So just that even the smaller bank has $13 trillion of derivatives.
It is amazing. Yeah, but yeah, it probably had to do with silver. And silver is the Achilles heel of the financial system. So, if we have an enemy, and the United States has a lot of enemies these days, it was pretty well known. I think it is pretty well known now around the world that silver is the Achilles heel. Gold also, but gold's a higher value. It would take a lot more money to control the gold market. But at the GATA thing, we'd have GATA conferences, and like the head of the finances for Russia would go to the GATA conferences instead of the Wall Street conferences. They knew exactly what's going on, and and they, and there is benefit to humanity for keeping this thing going and kicking the can. I don't think there's any benefit for the U.S. anymore because everybody knows what we've done, and we lie about every number now, and there is no sound base that the United States is working off. We're working off massive amounts of money creation, and a lot of it we don't even tell the world about.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that Russia goes to GATA conferences. I remember in the debate you talked about earlier between Bill Murphy and Jeff Christian, one of the things that stood out to me, he mentioned how there was a WikiLeaks, I believe, from 2009, essentially indicating that the Chinese government knew or at least suspected that the U.S. was suppressing the gold price, which when you think about how these forces are playing out in the world, and certainly if I were China and I were tired of being called a currency manipulator, well, the guy calling me that is doing QE and everything else. You have to think that there are other large governments out there that aren't thrilled with the U.S. that notice what's going on, and it seems like a big vulnerable spot, especially if, the trade war isn't enough. At some point, God forbid, they try to launch some sort of military action between the gold and silver China's acquired, and I don't think it's their first choice to say, let's dump treasuries and crash the market. But I mean, if you have a gun to your head, it is interesting to think about the leverage that they do have.
Oh, absolutely. And China knows, Wen Jiabao, the ex-president of China or whatever he was a gold bug, and his wife was in the gold business. And, Jim Sinclair was talking about every year they pull off 2,000 tons of gold out of the markets when, they're only mining 2,400 tons a year back then. And 2,000 tons was being sucked up by China for like 15 years. And so then you're like, wow, where's all this? The gold is so interesting because the U.S. says, oh, we only have 8,000 tons of gold, a little over 8,000 tons. Well, China was pulling off 2,000 tons out of the market every year for 15 years. That's 30,000 tons right there. And the numbers are such lies.
They never added up. That was what I guess was crazy. It just never added up.
No. And so, behind the scenes, the big countries know what's going on. I think China's working with Russia's working with Trump to take out some of the deep state actors, and which is good, and we need that. But you take them away, and you have a big void of first of all the people. We're such a split country right now. What would happen if Trump says, okay, here's all the real evidence of what really happened?
Right.
Here's Hillary Clinton's emails. Here's what was on Anthony Weiner's laptop. Here's what was going on with the FISA. Here's Strzok and Page and Brennan talking about assassinating the new president. If all this stuff comes out, I think it's the only way to unite the country is to just show the cards, all the bad stuff that's been going on, and then let the chips fall where they may, and they will fall. And I just, I think the guys who try to do the smooth landing of the economy and all that, which they're trying to do right now, I think it's a mistake. I think we've been trying to do that for over 100 years. And it's how we got into this position in the first place, that everything is rigged. And you can't, and we've got regulators now, their number one duty is to make sure that markets trade smoothly. It doesn't say anything about trade fairly or at fair market value, because fair market value is completely out of whack. It's just smooth trading, so they allow manipulation left and right.
Yeah, and it's like, how long do you go on with, we'll lie a little bit to make it smooth and go on longer? One thing I've been asking a lot of the folks that are in the book that we're creating here, I can't figure out another way that if you have all this leverage, maybe if you had some sort of stable dollar that hasn't become absolutely ridiculous, that would change things. But here we are, again, Bush Jr. comes into office after 225 years of the country. We're at $5 trillion. He doubles it to 10. Obama doubles it to 20. Still no talk of cuts. The budget reports just say this is when we expect to hit 30. Amazing. Nobody seems to notice that. Debt ceiling. Why do you even have it anymore? So, I mean, when you factor that in with the leverage in silver, is there some way this doesn't end with a short squeeze?
Yeah, it would be the complete shutdown of markets.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I see that's the thing is if the derivative bomb goes off, you're not going to have the COMEX and LBMA won't be up and running. There'll be no markets running because all the banks have been destroyed. And so yes, silver and gold will be extremely valuable, but you won't know how much they're worth because there's no exchanges trading. And you won't be valuing them in US dollars because the US dollar would be gone. That's why they had to bail out the banks in 2008. That the whole concept of too big to fail means that if they do fail, everything gets destroyed overnight. Like literally, just banks just shut their doors because, as we all know, they're hyper leveraged, their fractional reserve system. They all own the same type of assets. If their same type of assets go down, it's 2008 all over again. You're not going to need 700 billion this time. You're going to need 20 or 30 trillion. Right. And I don't think the appetite is there to bail out banks again.
Although you've talked a lot about how you have the feeling that inside a lot of these institutions that for a long time I just labeled as not so good, yet there are good forces and that perhaps a transition is underway with the folks who are taking things a little more responsibly, that a transition is underway involving cryptos, but so that it won't be the Armageddon that I think a lot of people who get into the precious metals markets have feared. Is that still your thought on how that's playing out behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of people who work for the U.S. Treasury or the U.S. Fed really do have good intentions. There's a couple people nearing the top that have bad intentions, and I remember going through Arthur Burns' minutes of his Fed meetings, and you could tell who the evil ones were, and he would just lay into them. He always wanted to go back onto a gold standard. But yeah, there's people within the Fed who there's been a lot of different plans to transition out of the fiat monetary system. I mean, if you look back at the creation of the Fed, I've done a lot of work on that, and to me, it was obvious. They found all this gold in the Grand Canyon. It would have destroyed everything. It would have destroyed the entire system. There was only 30 million ounces in circulation in the U.S., and then all of a sudden they find billions and billions of ounces in the Grand Canyon. What do? You create the Fed, you create this machine that can control the value of money, and then it gets completely out of hand, and then it gets too complicated to stop. And I think that's where we are. We're too complicated to stop. But if you think about it, what's our biggest problem today? It's not the creation of money. It is the debt and the money that is debt. So if you do crash the system, all of a sudden there's no more debt.
Yeah.
That would get rid of the biggest problem. Obviously, there's a million other problems that come up because one man's debt is another man's asset. But most of the banks hold all the debt, and are the the end recipient of all the money printing. And you think about where money is created. It's not created at the Fed for the most part. It's created at the banking level. They lend money into existence with houses and things like that. So they're giving you money to build a house that they didn't even have. So it's like, Hey, let's just give everybody the house they're sitting in. Squatters' rights.
Yep. It is incredible. And I guess along those lines, in terms of things crashing the system or crashing the silver market or freeing the silver market, we hear about how tight the supply is often, and that when there's a big order, it's a bit of a scramble to get sourced. I'm curious, what is the amount of silver that someone can't buy? In other words, at what point do you get, if you say, I want to buy 1,000 ounces, you can call Miles Franklin, and we're happy to help you with that.
That's right. Call Miles Franklin.
Buy, 1,000,000 ounces, or we hear when Eric Sprott had a big order for, I guess, the PSLV that
took him months.
Give it to him easy. Like, what is the amount where you just can't get filled that would be too much for them to keep the thing going?
I have no idea. I'm always amazed that they've been able to scramble up and find the silver somewhere. I heard at one point they had to go to the Vatican to get silver. But some of the signs to me, like the facility at the Manhattan Project, that they borrowed. It was like 3 billion ounces of silver from the U.S. Treasury to make these things called calutrons,
Right.
to make the first atom bomb. That was up and running until the mid-90s, and all of a sudden, for some reason, they shut it down and pulled all the silver out, and a lot of the silver was shipped over to England. It's on the U.S. export data. So what that told me is there is a point where too much goes. Too much silver is used up because they had to tear the facility down after a long time. It was up and running all the way to the mid-90s. So if that extra 3 billion ounces was now out there and now has probably been consumed in all the electronics, what's the next thing that they'll go after? JP Morgan's 800 million ounce hoard maybe. But I don't know if anybody cares as much with the cryptos out there. Gold and silver used to be the only alternative to fiat money for hundreds of years.
Right.
And now there's this new thing, cryptocurrencies, and the good ones. There's a lot of fraud in there. I grant anybody that there's plenty of fraud in the cryptocurrencies. But on the same breath, it is a form of money that doesn't rely on people for scarcity factors. And that's so big. It's so gigantic. Because right now, with gold and silver, you still don't know how much gold and silver is out there.
Right.
And, that's a problem. And you can always mine more at the bottom of the ocean or on asteroids. And yes, it will cost a lot more money, and silver and gold prices would have to go to the moon, literally, to do that. But like with Bitcoin, there's always going to be 21 million coins, and it's the year 2140 that the last Bitcoin will be mined. So I think on the if we're comparing the two, I think Bitcoin wins on the scarcity factor. Although, yeah, you can create new forks from Bitcoin and new cryptocurrencies. I'm like arguing with myself right now. These are the things I've been thinking about for the past 10 years.
Well, it's like you always are trying to figure out, it's like I must be missing something where, I got into it and then I spent the last decade seeing, what am I not seeing here? It's truly stunning. And perhaps a few more quick ones before we wrap up, but would love to get your take on these. I think it'll be fun. I was actually at the World Trade Center site the day that they came down. I was working for Moody's at the time. Fascinating as I've studied it over the past 20 years. And one of the things I hear quite a bit about is that there was a lot of gold and silver involved in one of the towers. And again, hard to figure out exactly what happened, but would love to hear anything that you've heard about that. I know you talk about 55 Water Street as well. Anything you can share on that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of these big office buildings with the vaults in the basement are connected. Mm-hmm. And like the Fed is connected to the JP Morgan building, which China ended up buying. And then 55 Water Street was the DTCC. Yes. It was reported in a few news agencies that massive amounts of gold and silver. That's the first thing they said. Oh, the gold and silver is fine. Don't worry about it. Dude, it's under ash right now. How do you know if the gold and silver is fine? And then they have pictures of them removing it, and supposedly a truckload didn't quite make it out in time, and there was literally a half-loaded armored car of gold. They didn't have time to think that way when all this stuff was happening. It was pure chaos. There's so many things about 9/11 that are just, it's so obvious that it wasn't, the official story isn't real. And you're not allowed to talk about it on like YouTube and things like that. They'll defund you or give you a strike or throw you off the playground. And that's not right for our country. We're supposed to have free speech, and without free speech, you're going to lose your freedom. I'm like quoting lyrics from my new song. I'm writing this song about the literal the abandonment of free speech on social media, allowing these companies to kick people off who say things that are politically incorrect or on the wrong side of the current political climate is crazy. But yeah, 9/11, I absolutely think it one day it will be reopened. The case will be reopened when we come to truth and truth and honesty hearings about everything that's been done. Why stop at 9/11? Just how about all the false flags and all the manipulation of markets and the manipulation of elections? And if we're going to go there, let's just go there and figure it all out so we can move forward. And I think that's really the only way we can move forward without all this craziness.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because I guess a lot of what led me to leave Wall Street, one of the turning points, I would walk through the Occupy Wall Street movement every day on the way to the stock exchange. And there was one day